Picture an old house at sunset, with light coming through a window that no longer opens for just anyone. Can you imagine it? The smells, the memories of your home, the door that for years welcomed voices, visitors, problems, emergencies, and hands that arrived empty but left full. And now, when your body feels heavier and time feels more valuable, you begin to ask yourself something you once refused to face. Who deserves to enter the last sacred territory you have left? As you grow older, not every relative who comes close is moved by love. Some come out of self-interest, others out of control, others out of guilt, and others because they realize too late that your house, your money, your peace, or your presence can still serve them. That is why there comes a moment when "do not open your door to these relatives when you grow old" stops sounding like a harsh warning and becomes an act of clarity, because blood can create history, but it does not always create entitlement. In this video, we will walk through 7 points to help you tell the difference between sincere presence and convenience in disguise, real care and quiet invasion, genuine affection and family manipulation. We will look at it through Stoicism, a wisdom more than 2,000 years old that was not made for pretty speeches, but for holding difficult decisions with character, self-command and peace. Stay until the end, because the final point may completely change the way you understand closing a door without guilt. Before we get into today's topic, remember that by going to thestoicgarden.com, you will find the Stoic Library of Self-Respect, a collection of 5 books to help you apply Stoicism where it is hardest, in your relationships, your decisions, and your self-respect. Now let's begin. There are always relatives who do not arrive walking. They arrive sniffing. They were not there when the house was quiet. They did not show up when your days were repetitive. They did not ask about your health when there were still no papers, accounts, properties, or decisions on the horizon. But let there be an illness, a retirement, a conversation about inheritance or some sign of weakness, and suddenly they remember your address, your phone number, and even the kind tone they had tucked away in some drawer. We have reached the first point of this journey, the relative who only shows up when they sense something might be divided. The most painful and unsettling thing about this kind of relative is not just their interest. It is the way they try to dress that interest up as belated affection. Suddenly they call you with a sweetness you had never heard before. Suddenly they want to go with you to the doctor. Suddenly they ask if you need anything, but their eyes are not looking at your tiredness. They are looking at the map of what you might leave behind, and you feel it. Even if you have no proof, even if no one says it openly, something inside you senses that this closeness has a strange smell. It is not clean love. It is calculation wrapped in soft words. Old age makes certain intentions more visible because it leaves less room for performance. When someone has spent years not caring for you and appears exactly when something might change hands, it is better to observe than to get emotional. Not because you should live suspicious of everyone, but because naivety in the second half of life can cost too much. There are relatives who do not ask about your well-being. They ask about your situation. They are not interested in how you sleep, but in who manages your affairs. They do not want to know if you are at peace. They want to know if you have already made a decision. How perfectly timed their tenderness is, right? Just now, they discovered that you exist. Seneca, who understood human greed and the fragility of relationships when self-interest appears, wrote that it is not the person who has little who is poor, but the one who endlessly desires what he can never fully possess. That line lands with force here because there are relatives who do not come because they miss you. They come because something is missing inside them. And when a person lives from lack, they can turn even a blood bond into an opportunity to gain an advantage. They do not see a life. They see a possibility. They do not see a history. They see a share. They do not see an older person who deserves respect. They see a door that might be opened ahead of time. That is why you must watch the timing. Time reveals what words conceal. Where was that person before your health began to worry everyone? Where were they before a property, an account, a pension, a signature, a medical decision, or a possible division was mentioned? Did they appear when you needed company, or when it began to look as though something might become available? You do not need to accuse. You do not need to fight. You only need to stop confusing appearance with love. Because someone who loves you does not wait until there is something to divide before remembering that you exist. This relative often operates through a mix of sudden closeness and seemingly innocent questions. They want to know who has keys, who goes with you, where you keep documents, what you plan to do with your house, whether you have spoken to a certain person, whether you have put your affairs in order. It all sounds practical, sensible, even responsible. But there is a huge difference between helping you stay protected and surrounding you in order to position themselves. True care respects your pace. Disguised self-interest pushes, insists, gets ahead of itself, and wants to enter places that do not yet belong to it. Closing the door to this kind of presence does not mean rejecting help or becoming bitter. It means recognizing that your old age is not an emotional auction where someone who arrived late can raise their hand and claim closeness. Your life is not an inventory. Your house is not a promise. Your money is not an invitation. And your trust should not be handed over to someone who only discovered your value when they imagined something might benefit them. Now that we have seen how self-interest can disguise itself as family presence, it is time to look at an even more delicate form of invasion, the kind that does not only seek to receive, but to decide for you. Pay attention to this. There are relatives who do not walk in saying they want to dominate you. They walk in saying they want to help you. That is the problem. Because the word help can sound noble even when it is loaded with control. They begin by giving opinions about your doctors, then about your money, then about your schedule, later about your visitors, and by the time you realize what is happening, they are no longer accompanying your old age. They are managing it, as if your age had cancelled your judgment. Now it is time to enter the second point of this video. The relative who turns your old age into an opportunity to make decisions for you. This type can be more dangerous than the openly self-interested relative because they often seem responsible, concerned, efficient. They speak with confidence, they organize papers, they make calls, they correct you, they explain what is best. And at first you may even feel relieved because after so many years carrying everything yourself, having someone take initiative can feel like a blessing. But receiving support is one thing. Handing over command of your life without consciously deciding to do so is something very different. Healthy help is offered. Control installs itself. Behind this behavior, there is a silent phrase. You can no longer make good decisions. Sometimes they do not say it that way because it would sound too brutal. They disguise it as concern. They tell you not to make things difficult, that you should just rest now, that they will handle it, that you do not understand those matters, that at your age it is better not to worry. And of course, it all sounds so considerate that you should almost be grateful they are taking away your own voice. What a family miracle. They infantilize you with a smile and still expect you to call it care. But old age does not turn a person into an administrative object. Growing old does not automatically mean losing the right to have an opinion about your house, your body, your routine, your money, or your peace of mind. You may need support with some things. There may be decisions where it is wise to listen. Certain tasks may weigh more than they used to. But needing help is not the same as giving up authority over your own life. At what point did asking for company become handing over the wheel? Since when does a wrinkle on the skin give someone else permission to occupy your will? Here, you have to make a very precise distinction. The relative who truly cares tries to help you preserve as much autonomy as possible. They inform you, accompany you, consult you, explain without imposing, respect your timing, and understand that your dignity does not disappear because you now need support. By contrast, the one who uses your old age to gain power starts deciding first and informing you afterward. They speak on your behalf. They answer for you. They interrupt you. They minimize your preferences. They turn your doubts into incapacity and your disagreements into stubbornness. Little by little, your life begins to function like a house where you still live, but no longer rule. This dynamic becomes especially dangerous when it touches sensitive matters. Money, medical treatments, properties, signatures, accounts, living arrangements, visits, caregivers, inheritances, moving house. In those areas, any improper advance should be observed calmly and firmly. Because someone who gets used to deciding small things without asking permission may feel entitled tomorrow to decide the big things. And the serious harm does not always happen all at once. Sometimes it begins with a call made for your own good, with a password you gave to make things easier, with a signature they asked for so you would not have to deal with it, with a conversation where they made you feel guilty for wanting to think a little longer. Stoicism teaches that some things depend on us, and some things do not. Epictetus, who went from slavery to teaching inner freedom, insisted that true firmness begins when a person clearly distinguishes what belongs to their will. In old age, that teaching becomes concrete. Maybe it does not depend on you to keep the strength you once had, or to avoid every health problem, or to control what others think about your age. But it does depend on you not to surrender your judgment too soon. It does depend on you to ask for explanations. It does depend on you to say, "I will think about it." It does depend on you to remember that receiving help does not require obedience. Do not allow someone to turn your tiredness into their opportunity. Do not let your need for support become a silent transfer of authority. Be grateful to the one who helps without invading. Listen to the one who advises without pressuring. But keep your distance from the one who needs you to appear weak, so they can feel in charge of the situation. Having seen this, there is still one older and more dangerous key to understand. Guilt, that tool many relatives use when they no longer have any rightful entry. Think about this. There are relatives who do not need to shout, threaten, or make a scene. All they need is one sentence said at the exact right moment, one perfectly placed look of disappointment, that tone of an old victim that seems loaded with every favor, every sacrifice, and every family story that, according to them, you should keep paying for until the last day of your life. They do not bang on the door. They bring guilt close to the lock and wait for you to open it from the inside. We have reached the third point of this journey, the relative who uses guilt as a master key to enter where they were not invited. Guilt is a powerful tool because it does not look like violence. It looks like memory. It looks like wounded love. It looks like a legitimate complaint. They tell you family is family, that you cannot close the door on your own people, that after everything you have been through, you should be more understanding, more generous, more human. And while they speak, they are not trying to understand your reasons. They are trying to make you doubt them, because if they can make you feel like a bad person for protecting your peace, they have already won half the battle. They do not need to convince you with arguments. They only need to stain your decision until you feel ashamed to stand by it. This kind of relative usually knows your soft spots very well. They know if it hurts you to seem selfish. They know if it is hard for you to say no. They know whether your story includes abandonment, sacrifice, family promises, demanding parents, or an old command to always be available. And they use all of it with a precision that would almost deserve applause if it were not so miserable. They remind you of what you did before, so you will do it again. They remind you of what others will say, so you will fear looking bad. They remind you that time passes, that you are older now, that it is not good to end things in conflict, as if age were an order to surrender instead of an opportunity to choose better. But it is worth making a calm distinction. There is guilt that comes from conscience, and there is guilt that others manufacture to move your decisions. The first helps you correct a real harm. The second pushes you to abandon a legitimate boundary. And if you do not learn to tell them apart, anyone with enough emotional skill can govern your life from the outside. Are you truly repairing an injustice, or are you simply calming the discomfort someone caused in you so they can get their way? Are you acting from your judgment, or from the fear of being called cold, ungrateful, difficult, dramatic? Manufactured guilt has a clear sign. It always demands that you give up something of yours so someone else does not have to examine anything of theirs. You must give in. You must understand. You must open up. You must forget. You must be the bigger person. The other person, curiously, never has to take responsibility for their absence, their self-interest, their invasions, their comments, their lack of respect. What a convenient kind of balance. The family scale always tips to the same side, and on top of that, they dare to call it love. In reality, what many people call family unity is often just an old system where one person endures and another gets used to being endured. Epictetus, that freed slave who understood freedom from a very different place than those who speak comfortably about it, taught that it is not events that disturb people, but the judgments they form about them. This idea becomes decisive when guilt appears, because the manipulative relative does not only want you to open the door, they want you to interpret your boundary as cruelty. They want you to see your need for peace as selfishness. They want you to confuse firmness with a lack of love. If they manage to change the judgment you make about your own decision, they no longer need to force you. You betray yourself just to feel like a good person. So when a relative uses guilt as a key, do not respond in a hurry. Breathe, observe, ask yourself what concrete fact you are evaluating and what emotion they are trying to impose on you. You do not have to justify your entire life in order to keep a door closed. You do not have to turn every boundary into a long speech, just so someone will approve it. Sometimes a calm sentence, a clear decision, and enough silence to avoid entering the drama are all you need. Because someone who truly loves you may be hurt by your boundary, but they will not need to destroy your peace in order to cross it. Now that guilt has been exposed, another slower form of invasion comes next, the one that begins as a visit and ends up occupying your life. Some doors are not lost all at once. They are lost through habit. First, someone comes for a few days because they are going through a hard time. Then they leave a bag, then a suitcase. Later, they begin taking calls in your living room, rearranging schedules, giving opinions about your kitchen, using your silence as permission. And when you try to take back your space, you discover that the visitor already feels entitled to live there, and you seem like the intruder in your own home. That brings us to the fourth point of this journey, the relative who came to stay even though no one invited them to stay forever. This invasion rarely begins with a hostile face. It almost always arrives wrapped in need. A divorce, a debt, a crisis, an argument, a lost job, a difficult season. And because you are not made of stone, you open the door. You offer a roof, a meal, support, company. Up to that point, nothing seems strange. The problem begins when the temporary arrangement loses its end date, when help turns into installation, when the person stops behaving like someone being welcomed and starts moving around as though that space also belongs to them by natural right. Then the silent tension appears. You do not want to seem cruel, but every day, the house where you grew old feels a little less yours. Gradual occupation has one advantage for the person who practices it. It avoids the clear moment of decision. No one openly asks if they can stay forever, because a question like that would force them to hear an answer. It is more effective to move forward through small, accomplished facts. One more night, a borrowed key, a piece of furniture placed there, a routine assumed, a visitor who no longer gives notice, an expense that is no longer discussed. And because each step seems small, it is hard to protest without feeling like you are exaggerating. But the sum of small, unexamined permissions can end up becoming a huge surrender. Here, it is worth looking at something many older people avoid out of fear or shame. Your house is not just a roof. It is your rhythm, your rest, your privacy, your memory, your way of beginning and ending the day. When someone settles in without a clear agreement, they do not occupy only a room. They occupy your energy. They occupy your patience. They occupy your ability to decide when to speak, when to be quiet, when to be alone, when to receive visitors, when to shut the world outside. How much space can one person take before your peace starts living in a corner? How many times can you say, "It is nothing," before it really does become something? The most delicate part is that this relative often uses your age to strengthen their presence. They make you believe it is good for you to have someone nearby, that it is better not to live alone, that at your age it is always good to have company. And in some cases that may be true. But company is not the same as invasion. Help is not the same as imposed permanence. Presence is not the same as domestic control. There are difficult kinds of loneliness, of course, but there are also kinds of company that make a house feel heavier than silence. And what an irony. Someone arrives saying they do not want you to be alone, and ends up making you miss the solitude that once felt hard. Marcus Aurelius wrote that authority was not given to impose itself on others, but to serve the rational order of the whole. In a home, that order matters. Not out of whim, not out of pride, not because you want to rule like a tyrant, but because without order, affection rots. Living together without clear limits eventually fills the house with resentment, reproaches, and small invasions no one dares to name. If someone needs to stay, there must be conditions. Time, responsibilities, contributions, respect for your spaces, explicit agreements. Because what is not clarified in the beginning often comes at the cost of suffering in the end. Preventing this dynamic is much easier than reversing it. Saying from the start, "You can stay until this date," weighs less than trying to remove someone who already feels like they own part of your life. Asking for clear agreements does not make you cold. It makes you aware. Because in old age, you cannot afford to spend your strength on conflicts that could have been avoided with one firm conversation. Your home should remain a place where you can breathe, not a permanent refuge for those who turn your compassion into their address. But if the invasion of space already seems serious, there is still a harder mask to detect: the affection that shines in front of others and fades when no one is watching. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you have made it this far, you are not here out of mere curiosity. Something in this message is touching your life. Write in the comments, "I am Stoic," followed by the city you are connecting from today. And if you want to go deeper into these teachings, by going to thestoicgarden.com, you will find the Stoic Library of Self-Respect, my 5 books to help you apply Stoic wisdom to your decisions, your relationships, and your inner command. Now let's keep going. There are relatives who understand the value of an audience perfectly. In front of others, they become attentive, smiling, helpful, almost exemplary. They take you by the arm, ask how you are, make a loving comment, maybe even offer to help you with a voice so kind that anyone would think you are lucky to be surrounded by pure love. But when the door closes, when there are no witnesses, when the family disperses and only the walls of your house remain, another person appears. Impatient, critical, controlling, cold, or simply absent. We have reached the 5th point of this journey, the relative who is affectionate in public but drains you in private. This kind of relative is especially difficult to confront because they have built a very solid social alibi. Others do not see what you see. They do not hear the sharp replies, the annoyed looks, the humiliating corrections, the heavy silences, or that way of making you feel like a burden when no one is watching. Outside, it looks like love. Inside, it feels exhausting. And that difference leaves you in a cruel position, because if you speak, you risk looking dramatic. If you stay silent, you continue living a reality others applaud without knowing it. Old age can make this double face more painful, because you no longer have the same energy to defend yourself against other people's theater. Maybe before you argued, explained, answered back, threw yourself into the battle. But with the years, you begin to value peace more. And that is why the relative who behaves well in public and badly in private finds fertile ground. They know you may not want to create conflict. They know it will hurt you to be seen as ungrateful. They know the rest of the family will say you are sensitive, that you are misinterpreting things, that this person worries so much about you. Of course, they worry so much that their tenderness only reaches them when there is an audience. Pay attention to the everyday, because that is where true character is revealed. Not in the family photo, not at Sunday lunch, not in the sweet comment made in front of others. Character shows itself when there is no applause to win. It shows itself in the patience with which they listen to you repeat something, in the way they respect your small decisions, in how they speak to you when you make a mistake, in whether they look at you as a person or as a task. What good is someone hugging you in front of everyone if they later treat you like a nuisance in private? What value does affection have if it needs witnesses in order to exist? The public mask also has a defensive function. If you ever complain, that person will already have built their image. Others will think perhaps you are being unfair, that you do not appreciate what they do for you, that at your age you have become difficult. And then another layer of exhaustion begins. You are not only enduring the private treatment, you are also carrying the pressure of a public version that leaves you without credibility. It is an elegant form of manipulation because it does not need to stain you directly. It is enough for them to appear flawless before others, so your pain starts to look suspicious. That is why you should not measure love by what someone displays, but by what they sustain when no one is watching. True affection does not change faces depending on the room it is in. It may get tired, it may make mistakes, it may have difficult days, but it does not need to humiliate you in private and then pose as your protector in public. The relative who truly loves you does not use your old age as a stage to win moral points with others. They care for you with the same decency when there are visitors and when only the silence of the house remains. You do not have to convince the whole family of what you already know. Sometimes it is enough to stop giving that person unlimited access to your intimacy, reduce their power, observe their behavior without letting yourself be confused by their public performance. Give more weight to what happens in private, because that is where the practical truth of the relationship lives. And if someone only knows how to treat you well when others are watching, then perhaps they are not protecting your heart. They are protecting their reputation. But after seeing this mask, there is still a more subtle dynamic left. The one where someone needs you to feel incapable so they can feel indispensable. There are relatives who are not exactly trying to take something material from you, occupy your home, or manipulate you with dramatic scenes. Their way of entering is quieter. They keep telling you that you can no longer do things, that you should be careful, that you should not do that alone, that it is better if they handle it, that at your age it is normal to depend on others, that you should not take risks, that you should not decide so quickly, that you should not go out, that you should not sign, that you should not speak, that you should not push yourself. At first it looks like protection, but over time you discover that every phrase reduces your confidence a little more. Here we enter the sixth principle of this video, the relative who needs you to be weak so they can feel needed. This type is dangerous because they do not always act from obvious malice. Sometimes they even convince themselves they are caring for you. But the result is the same. They make you smaller. They exaggerate your limitations, emphasize your mistakes, interpret any forgetfulness as a sign of incapacity, any tiredness as proof of decline, any doubt as confirmation that you should no longer decide. And little by little, if you are not careful, you begin to see yourself through that person's eyes. You no longer ask what you can still do. You begin to ask what they will allow you to do. Dependence can also become a form of power. Whoever manages to establish themselves as indispensable occupies a privileged place in your life. They control schedules, decisions, conversations, access, relationships. They decide what is good for you and what is not. They decide who comes in and who goes out. They decide what information reaches you and what gets filtered. All in the name of care, of course. Always for your own good. That phrase has been used to justify so many invasions that it should come with a built-in alarm. Marcus Aurelius, who wrote in order to govern himself before trying to impress others, left a very useful teaching for this point. Watch the source of your actions, because from one careless thought, a life can be directed by outside forces. In old age, that vigilance is essential, because if you allow others to plant in you the idea that you are no longer capable of anything, you will eventually act from that belief. And then they will not have had to take your freedom with an order. It will have been enough for them to weaken the image you have of yourself. This does not mean denying reality. It would be absurd to pretend that the body does not change, that energy does not decrease, that some tasks do not require support, or that certain risks should not be approached with caution. Wisdom does not mean acting as if you were 20 years old. It means refusing to let your real limits be used to invent false incapacities. Do you need help with certain things? Perhaps. Does that mean you have lost the right to think, choose, give your opinion, decide, correct, and keep your judgment? Absolutely not. Adapting life to a new stage is one thing. Allowing someone to turn that stage into a comfortable cage is something very different. The relative who needs you to be weak usually reacts badly when you show autonomy. If you decide something without consulting them, they get upset. If you handle something on your own, they reproach you. If you go out, if you speak your mind, if you set a boundary, if you recover a piece of your independence, out comes the exaggerated concern, the offended expression, or the phrase that tries to return you to a place of dependence, because your strength threatens their role. If you can do things, they lose the spotlight. If you decide, they stop feeling essential. What a curious kind of care, the kind that grows uneasy when you begin to do better. That is why you must defend your abilities the way you would defend a house. Calmly, realistically, and firmly. Accept help where it is necessary, but do not hand over the command center. Do what you can still do. Decide what you can still decide. Ask, learn, review. Sign only when you understand. Preserve your own relationships. Maintain routines that remind you that you are still a whole person. Old age is not an automatic surrender of your own judgment. It is a stage where lucidity must become more careful, not more obedient. Once this is understood, the journey is ready to rise to its highest point. Learning that closing a door can also be a mature way of honoring the life that still belongs to you. There comes a moment in life when the door stops being wood, metal, or a lock. It becomes a symbol. It represents your time, your energy, your intimacy, your final years of peace, your right to live without being invaded by those who confused kinship with permission. For a long time, perhaps you opened it out of habit, out of politeness, out of fear of what people would say, out of not wanting to seem harsh, out of not wanting to carry the guilt of leaving someone of your own blood outside. But the second half of life demands another kind of wisdom, understanding that not every person who shares your last name deserves access to your inner world. We have reached the seventh point, and it is the lesson that rearranges everything that came before. Learn that closing your door to someone who does not deserve it is not ingratitude. It is the wisest act of your second half. Closing the door does not always mean hatred. Sometimes it means memory. It means you remember who appeared only when something could be divided. You remember who wanted to decide for you under the excuse of caring for you. You remember who used guilt to push you into giving in. You remember who came in for a few days and began to occupy your life. You remember who smiled in front of everyone and drained you when no one was watching. You remember who needed to see you weak in order to feel important. You are not closing from resentment. You are closing from lucidity. And there is a huge difference between acting wounded and acting awake. Family can be a refuge, yes, but it can also be a place where small abuses are normalized because no one wants to disturb tradition. There are families where the person who finally sets a boundary is called difficult. The one who stops being available is called ungrateful. The one who no longer allows invasions is called cold. The one who decides to preserve some peace before the years they have left are squeezed dry is called selfish. How curious. While you endure, you are good. When you wake up, you become the problem. Maybe that says less about your change and more about the benefit others lost when you stop being easy. In old age, time becomes more honest. There is no longer so much life ahead that you can afford to waste it on endless family theater. You can no longer allow every visit to leave you sick, every phone call to steal your calm, every conversation to end with you feeling guilty for wanting peace. How many more years are you going to give to people who only respect your door when it suits them? How much peace must a person lose before accepting that a bond is not honored merely because it exists, but by the way it treats the sacred things it is allowed to touch? Seneca, reflecting on time, warned that it is not that we have too little, but that we lose much of what has been given to us. That idea hits harder as you grow older, because the time you lose justifying boundaries, tolerating visits that unsettle you, explaining decisions to someone who does not want to understand, or sustaining bonds that use you, does not come back. No one gives you back an afternoon of anguish. No one gives you back a sleepless night caused by family manipulation. No one gives you back the years you spent calling something love when, in truth, it was tolerated exhaustion. That is why the final question is not whether you have the right to close the door. The question is why it took you so long to recognize it. Your door should open to the one who enters with respect, not to the one who arrives with demands, to the one who protects your freedom, not to the one who needs to manage it, to the one who honors your story, not to the one who calculates your inheritance, to the one who knows how to sit with you without taking over your entire life, to the one who understands that loving you in old age does not mean reducing you, manipulating you, or using your fragility as an opportunity. Blood can explain a bond, but it cannot justify every behavior. Closing a door with wisdom does not make you less human. It gives your humanity back to you. It allows you to breathe in your own home, decide with your own judgment, live the age you are without apologizing for protecting what still belongs to you. Because at the end of life, a well-closed door can be more loving than a door left open to abuse. Love for yourself, love for your peace, love for the dignity you should not have to surrender just so others can keep coming in and out of your life as though you were not the owner of that threshold. If you have made it this far, you are not one of those people who hear a hard truth and rush to hide it under the family rug. You have held an uncomfortable idea that growing old does not force you to open the door to everyone who shares blood with you, or to hand over your home, your decisions, your money, your time, or your calm to those who only appear when it suits them. Today you learn to recognize self-interested presence, care that is really control, guilt that tries to govern you, the visit that moves in, affection that performs for an audience, and help that needs to see you weak. Now the decision stands before you, to keep calling every invasion family, or to begin living this stage with firmer wisdom. At this point in the journey, I want to invite you not to leave this reflection floating in the air. If you want to bring it into your daily life, your relationships, your boundaries, and the way you make decisions, go to thestoicgarden.com to learn more. There you will find 5 books where I develop this wisdom calmly, so you can work through it at your own pace, return to it, and apply it when you need it most. And if this video has helped you, tell me in the comments where in the world you are joining me from today. I do my best to read them and reply whenever I can. I am Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. This channel exists to accompany you through the second half of life with a clearer, stronger, and more serene perspective. Not to feed resentment against family, but to help you distinguish true love from habit, manipulation, or self-interest. Subscribing is not just following a channel, it is continuing to walk in a different direction, toward a life with more firmness, less fear, and greater respect for your own peace. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that setting boundaries does not make them a bad person, because sometimes one clear sentence arrives just before someone opens again a door that has already caused them too much harm. And up next, 2 recommended videos will appear so you can continue going deeper on this path toward a life with more character, inner peace, and wisdom.